You are blessed to have a pastor like Pastor John, because he wants to get you to get all the information so you can make an informed decision. And we're not getting all the information from our government schools, museums, and media. And the title for tonight is All Creationists on Deck. We have the wind at our sails. We got a theory that's making accurate predictions. We've got more easily accessible information. But you guys have ever heard of Solidify Your Faith at all? Probably not. And you may not know much about me, but there's a little bit about what I do. Yeah, this has been my ministry for about 12 years now. Somebody cracked the door open to creation about 20 years ago, and this is where I am now. Actually, somebody even flew me to Houston last year a couple of times to give talks. I'm going to be debating an evolutionist on July 26th. This is on a YouTube channel called Standing for Truth. His name is Mark Reed, so if you would pray for Mark's salvation, I would certainly appreciate that. I've been on that channel before. I'm going to be doing the Global Genesis Flood Seminar. This is the Hydroplate, and this is our ace in the hole. They cannot answer what we are predicting. We're making accurate predictions. NASA discoveries are validating what we're predicting, and discoveries validate the theory. And so we'll be covering that on Wednesday or on Sunday. So if you want to come, you're going to see a theory that hits the ball out of the park, and the more people who know about that, the better off we're going to be. And I believe that the hydroplate will destroy the Big Bang when it gets into the mainstream. We just need people to get it into the mainstream. And I also did a talk there called The Emperor Has No Clothes, and everybody should get one of these sheets. It's got websites on the front, the YouTube channel, and then it's got information on the back that you need to get informed with. You understand the battle and where the weaknesses are. But that's Standing for Truth. That guy's actually going to be speaking for the Twin Cities Creation Science Association next month. And I think he's the best up-and-coming creationist we got. Because he hosts debates all the time, so he sees where the weaknesses are, he sees where the strengths are. And when you watch one of his debates, the best part of the debate is the moderator. You can't tell what side he's on. And there's times he let us go, and there's times he'd rein us in. But he's going to be on TCC Essays. That's the third Tuesday of every month. And if all goes well, we Zoom it, we live stream it. And actually, our St. Cloud State Creation Club joined into it. You know, we just had a club meeting at St. Cloud State, and we Zoomed it in from the University of Northwestern. And so I'd love to have people do that all over the state, all over the country, all over the world. Plus, those talks show up on our YouTube channel, and it's kind of like a library. It's got geology talks, biology talks from a creationist perspective, and it's just a blessing. I'm going to be doing a Grand Canyon debate. That's going to be a lot of fun on June 28th. I debated a science teacher. I think it was last month. It's all a blur. And this is just a highlight of a debate of the science teacher.
If plate tectonics are false, how are there mountains?
That's because during the hydroplate, the water was gushing up with such tremendous force, and these two cliffs, 60 miles high, were crumbling into the force, shooting them out, and the cliffs got wider and wider and wider, and then pretty soon there's nothing pushing down on the Atlantic Ocean and the mantle, and it bulges. So now you got North America and South America sliding to the west, and you got Africa and Europe sliding to the east, and they keep going until they meet resistance, and then they buckle up. And that's why the mountain ranges are pretty much parallel to the mid-oceanic ridge and mid-Atlantic ridge. And that's how we got the mountains. And then the mountains sink down and some has to rise up, and that's how we got the plateaus.
Thank you, Brian.
So that's how the mountains formed. That's how the plateaus formed. It also explains the origin, what they'd find in comets and asteroids. One theory explains 25 major features on Earth and in the solar system. And somebody flew me down to Houston so I could give this talk. And all those, researchers want to know why, unexpected. These are all secularists. Those are screenshots from secular journals. They can't explain things. Double-sided mystery, surprising feature, world of surprises. That's because your blind chance perspective of the past is wrong. You're always going to be surprised until you get a proper perspective of the past, and that's the hydroplate. And this is St. Cloud State's graduation on Friday, and I don't know if you can see what that bike says right there, but that's my bike right beside it, and it said, "Congratulations, grads. Did hydrogen and helium really turn into people?" Because I had that, this is a year or two ago, I had that bike there and a professor walks by and he says, "No, hydrogen and helium didn't turn into people." And I said, "Well, what did the Big Bang make?" And he didn't say anything, and I said, "Hydrogen, helium, and a little bit of lithium." And he goes, "Yeah, and those things turned into stars that exploded, that turned into the stuff, that turned into people." And I forget what I said to him, but it's basically prove it. I mean, you can imagine it, prove it. But they put it in the textbooks, and when I debated that science teacher, the science teacher, I went to St. Cloud State to edit it. And so this is my bike in front of the science building, and when I got to the bike, after about 4 or 5 hours, there was a sticky note on it that said, "Remember, Google is free. It takes only 2 seconds to learn and not fall for this bike sign propaganda." And it's like, and I showed that to a student walking by. I says, "Is this question, is that propaganda? I'm just asking a question." I said, "What's really propaganda is what you're being taught in the science class, because they only give you one perspective of the past. They don't let you think." And we talk to students all the time. And one of the fastest things to do, it's like, you're being taught a blind chance perspective. That's like this addition got put on by blind chance. Is that how it happened? No, it's to be absurd to think that. Well, how much more absurd to think our bodies got put together by chance. But if that's all you ever see, and that's all they ever allow in the science room, well, then you're not thinking, you're just memorizing. And that's indoctrination, or propaganda. And then the next time I went back there, I had a new sign. It said, "Forcing a blind chance origin of life is propaganda." When you only give them one perspective. And I am thankful for the freedom of speech. And we have to use it or we're going to lose it. And every year or two, I always have to have some conversations with the security people so they understand the freedom of speech. And I'm going to be speaking June 3rd at a community action team event. That's organizations in a community that keep an eye on the school board, the city council, the health department. And I'm going to be speaking in Elk River. And Elk River flipped their school board in 4 years. They didn't like what the school board was doing, and they got 2 people on 2 years ago, and they got 2 people on last year, and now they got the majority. And I went to a couple of their meetings. It's like, how did you do that? I've been at the school board meeting 6 times, and you can see those on my YouTube channel, my comments, and they don't do anything. And so they invited me to speak. This is going to be June 3rd, and I think we should get more involved. And let's see, there's a list of them: Beltrami, Anoka, Crow Wing, Dakota. They want one in every county. Douglas, Goodhue, Hennepin, Isanti, Kennebec, Pine, Ramsey, Sherburne, and Wright. And I spoke in the one in Alexandria, that Douglas one. This was around COVID time, and I did a talk on tyranny, and it said, "Help people wake up before it's too late." Now this talk will get censored on YouTube, so I have to have a Rumble channel to get talks like this up. But we got a couple of them. Education, Not Indoctrination. Education, Not Indoctrination clips, which is shorter ones, and then Revival of Truth. Because a pastor in Wisconsin asked me to do a Revival of Truth for him. 3 times Sunday plus Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday night. And I said, how about we do Creation Science, or Creation Sunday, 3 messages. Then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we'll take a look at a Revival of Truth that's been withheld from us. Because it's not just science where they're withholding information. They've got a lot of government narratives. That's all they allow. And I said on Monday we could do a Revival of Truth of the, what do we call it? Behind the Vaccine Curtain. well, what don't we know about vaccines? And that was, and that was before COVID. And then Tuesday was the COVID corruption. And then Wednesday was the world economic tyranny that they want to ram down our throats. And for that pastor's credit, he said, yeah, let's do it. And so you can see some of those videos on my Revival of Truth. And I've got some more of those videos out in my car. If anybody wants one, I'll get one for you. But yeah, and so that's what we did. And they had a community action team called We the People, I think. And there was a lot of people that came, because we need all the information. We need all the information to make informed decisions, and it's not happening. And so that's why we got this talk titled All Creationists on Deck. We have more information than we've ever had, against the Big Bang and evolution. We've never had the origin of the cell, what we know about the cell, what we know about life. There's so much stuff that just contradicts evolution. And then we have more access to it than we've ever had before. It's just a click away. If you don't know something, it's because you haven't clicked on it. And what I encourage people, you got that handout, start clicking on those websites, start sharing them with your nieces, your nephews, your kids, anybody, and then start getting equipped. So then you can stand up to this godless indoctrination that's permeates our society. And there's the YouTube channels, and there's one of them they're really good. Basically, we need to understand what the battle is. You either believe in blind chance, that's the Big Bang and evolution, we just got here by chance, and I just call them blind chancers for short, blind chance, or it's creation. We either created or we weren't. It was blind chance or a creator, and this is their timeline. 13 billion years ago, they violate the first law of thermodynamics by getting matter from nothing, and then it organizes itself into this beautiful environment, which violates the second law, and then life pops on the scene, which violates the law of biogenesis, and then that single living cell turns into everything that's ever lived. Plus, we get consciousness from matter, ideas from the immaterial. They call that Einstein's gulf. He said that's a gulf that's unbridgeable. And so there's a lot of things they break laws of physics on. And then the contrary to that is the creation timeline. It's just thousands. There it is. It's pretty small compared to billions. So we will expand it a little bit. So roughly 6,000 years ago, God made everything in 6 days, and he rested. And 4,400 years ago, there's a worldwide flood. And that's where we get our fossils and layers of sediment. And then Jesus came 2,000 years ago. And then here we are today. And people jump on the scene at the end of the blind chance timeline, and they bounce on the scene at the beginning of the creation timeline. And people ask me, well, which one do you believe? And I said, I just agree with Jesus. He was a young earth creationist. Yeah, he said, but from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. The beginning. See, of the creation. So he's a creationist, and he's young earth because Adam and Eve are right at the beginning. Anybody who believes in theistic evolution must be calling Jesus a liar because the people came at the end. And Jesus is supposed to be our example. And if we're not following the example of Jesus, we should really reconsider our position. Because the creation timeline is logical and factual. A building had a builder, a painting had a painter, a creation had a creator. It's all logical. And we have a finely tuned universe just the way God made it. We have comets that can't last millions of years. We have a magnetic field that can't last millions of years, and spiral galaxies that can't last millions of years. And so we don't have to make any rescuing devices like the evolutionists do. We've got an expanding universe and at an accelerating rate. They can't explain that one. We got genes in unrelated animals. Like I was telling Pastor John, the genes for echolocation in a whale are the same as the echolocation genes in a bat. It's like, where's their common ancestor? They can't. They call it convergent. These two miraculously sophisticated things come together twice. Once is incredible enough, but twice. And then we find dinosaur blood and vessels and nerves. And they can't last millions of years. And carbon-14 and fossils and coal and diamonds can't last millions of years. So all that stuff fits. Just have a perspective of thousands instead of millions, and you don't have to break any laws of physics. You don't have to break any, you don't have to make any rescuing devices. And also accurate predictions, thanks to the hydroplate. Russell Humphreys, and you'll see this on your cheat sheet, he accurately predicted the magnetic fields of Uranus and Neptune before they knew what they were, based on a 6,000-year model. So astronomy points to 6,000. And that was one of the things that that the science teacher asked me, well, what points to 6,000? And I started listing them off, and he stopped me. I only got one or two out. The diffusion rate. He also accurately predicted the diffusion rate of helium from zircons, which doesn't mean anything to anybody, but it just points that 6,000 is right. It was, and then the billions of years was wrong. The mutation rates point to 6,000. Rounded boulders and comets, that was predicted. Salt on Mars, that was predicted. And we had, they were saying that you had appendices and tonsils. Those were vestigial. They don't do anything. They started taking them out like crazy. And now we find out that they have a function. And they said the same thing with the junk DNA. Creationists are saying it's not junk. There's a function. We'll find it. And guess what? We were right again. All right. And so that's our timeline. Let's take a look at the blind chance timeline. It's based on imagination and fraud. And it's illogical. A building had a builder, a painting had a painter, but you didn't have a designer? A creation didn't have a designer? George Washington on Mount Rushmore had to be created, but George Washington himself wasn't. So it's inconsistent. And they have to have a multiverse to explain our finely tuned universe. You take one of those factors, one of these cosmological factors, just to tweak it just a little bit, we don't have a universe. And so how did that happen? Well, it's, if there's an infinite number of universes, well, now it can happen because we live in the perfect one. And there's no evidence for that. We have comets still, can't last millions of years. They imagine an Oort cloud where they come from, but haven't observed it. We still have a magnetic field, and it should have been gone. So they imagine a dynamo, and there's a lot of holes with that one, especially with Uranus. And then we've got they have to imagine dark matter for the spiral galaxies. They have to imagine dark energy for the expanding universe at an accelerating rate. And dark matter and dark energy are supposed to be 96% of the universe, and they can't observe any of it. And it's like, if you can't explain 96% of the universe, let's check this on the scrap heap of history where it belongs. Let's start looking at that hydroplate. And then they have unknown, they don't even know how soft tissue lasts millions of years, but they have faith, they imagine that it's going to be found, that they'll find out. So they don't even have a rescuing device, they just have a lot of faith that they're going to find it. And then let's see, the blunders. This is what evolution can lead to, and we'll end on this, on why to get motivated. They had the superior race, which is basically the survival of the fittest, and that also implies the destruction of the unfit. And that's what they did in America, with eugenics. And let's see, they were wrong about vestigial organs, they're wrong about DNA, and they were wrong about their DART mission, and a lot of NASA stuff is wrong because they got the wrong perspective of the past. And it's based on frauds. Haeckel's drawings, Piltdown Man, Nebraska Man, Orsi Man, Homo habilis, those were all frauds. They were, and Dr. Carl Werner, I've got a book out in my car, he says he's found 150 cases of fraud in human evolution. 150. And he spent 27 years going around the world talking to scientists, photographing their fossils, and he only got his hands on about 10% of the ones he wanted. And he says, I don't use the word fraud lightly. Looking at a tooth and calling it an ape man tooth when it's a pig tooth, he says that's not fraud. That's a mistake. I would call it incompetence. But what he says is fraud is when they lied about when they found it. They said they found it the year before when it was actually 5 years before. And they also withheld the pig jaw from the public view. So there's 2 cases of fraud with Nebraska Man. And it goes on. And if you take my YouTube, you take one of these cards, and I hand these out at museums sometimes, and we'll talk about that. Creation Science 104, if you want to see the frauds. And he also falsified evolution twice. So it should have fallen apart long ago. But they got this unknown dinosaur soft tissue preservation. And the science teacher that I was debating, he said, well, it's just the stuff, it's remnants of it in the stone. That's all it is. It's like, no, it's not.
The laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say that it should be gone. It should be degraded completely.
And when I poked into it, it was spongy. It was flexible and soft tissue.
Flexible tissue from a 68-million-year-old dinosaur?
Blood vessels.
There they are.
Transparent, hollow, pliable, flexible, branching blood vessels that contain small, round, red microstructures floating in the vessels. I said, this is not possible. Do it again. We got another piece of bone. We put it in the solution. We waited 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. Looked again, more blood vessels. We must have repeated that with probably 17 or 18 different fragments of bone.
It's not possible. It's not possible. A stretchy like that can't last millions of years. They did a secular test on collagen. Collagen can only last 700,000 or 900,000 years, and yet you still find it in dinosaur bones. And so they keep on, it can't happen. But that's not in the textbooks. I went through the textbooks. It's not, that's the find of the century. And most, even PhDs don't know about it. And so I go to colleges, this is at our community college, and I want to know who believes in blind chance and who believes in creation. And that opens up a lot of discussion. And at the community college, the creation people won by a landslide. Wow. Yeah. So in spite of all those decades and trillions of dollars that they've had pushing this indoctrination, people aren't buying it. And I think we need to rise up. They did a Gallup poll, last year's Gallup poll. It actually showed, and this has been this case since they started in the 80s. You know, the people who believe, the percent of Americans that believe that God made man in his present form less than 10,000 years ago has been about 40% all these decades. And then at the bottom, it started out at like 10%, and now it's up to 25% for just atheistic evolution. And then like 20 or 30%, that's going to be theistic evolution. So they're taking the majority's tax money to teach a minority's view, and we need to stop that. We need to stop this trend. And oh, and then the thing, when I was preparing for that debate with the science teacher, I had these videos, long story short. These are really, they take a complex topic and they make it understandable. And this is just, I'll just give you a sample of it. I think your kids or nieces or nephews would enjoy it.
Floating around inside of the cell of all living things are machines that spot errors and label bad molecules, demolition machines, and recycling machines, among others. Fun fact, 1 in 20 machines in your body are actually for destroying the other 19. That's comforting. This machine can recognize when a ribosome is stuck, so it sticks a label on the half-finished protein called a degron. Then the unfinished protein needs to be chopped up for parts. Luckily, your body has little molecular chainsaws that love to chop up proteins. But hang on a second. Isn't it a bit dangerous to have protein chainsaws floating around inside of you? What if they chop up some useful thing? Wouldn't you know it, they're programmed to only chop up things labeled with a degron. Proteins that destroy other proteins are essential for life. Don't worry, you're safe.
And it just goes on and on and on. There's this thing called Eigenmann's paradox, where he realized, he saw how the DNA falls apart so fast. So he theorized that there has to be a DNA repair system there. And then he said, and then he found it. I think he got the Nobel Prize for that. But it's a paradox, because to get long strands of DNA, you need a repair system. And the repair system itself is a long strand of DNA. So how did you get that? There's so many chicken and egg things. And I went through our St. Cloud textbooks. They're copyright 2024. I went through them last summer, and I found a whole bunch of errors. And this is I'll go through just a couple of them, but there's, I think it's CS 108, Creation Science 108. That's where we go through all the errors in the textbook. And I showed it to the curriculum director, and she said, well, we're just teaching the state standards. And then I said, well, what standard says we're 1.6% different from chimpanzees? And she didn't respond, but the superintendent responded and said that we've contacted a law firm in our response. It's like, what? Why don't you just contact the publisher? Find out why this false information is in there, or at least have them justify it. But they supposedly contacted a law firm, and so I went to the school board meeting, and I asked them to contact it. And they kicked it to the superintendent. She apparently said that the curriculum director is working on it with me. And it's like, well, if that's the case, I won't have to be here. So I went back 6 times. Yeah, if anybody wants to be a school board member in St. Cloud, your campaign could be, I want accurate textbooks. You know, that should be a pretty easy one. Oh, and by the way, we got Superintendent of the Year. We did. Yeah, you'd think we'd have great test scores, right? No. No, only 1 in 4 students can do math or science at the state standard in St. Cloud. Only 1 in 3 can read at that level. Their bad score is getting worse, and yet they gave our superintendent the Superintendent of the Year award. It shows me that whole education department does not value education. And so we need to put a change to that. But this 1.6% different from chimpanzees, I asked the science teacher, I said, hey, which genome is bigger, the chimp or the humans? And he didn't know. And it's like, well, the chimps is bigger. We got 3.1 billion base pairs. They got 3.3 billion base pairs, which is a 6% difference. How can something that's 6% different be 1% the same? 1%. But this is how they got that 1% difference. And this is not a creation website. This is an evolution website.
If a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes, or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatched sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours. We may not actually be 99% chimp, but we are 100% great ape, and at least a little bananas.
So that's how they got 1%. They got rid of 18% of theirs and 25% of ours, and look at that, we're 1% difference. Well, yeah, I suppose they did the same thing with Lucy's hip. They cut it and twisted it to make it a chimp to a human. It looks a lot like ours. Well, I hope so. And so they cooked the books, they cooked the fossils, and it's just stunning that it's happening. It also tells the kids that chemicals bouncing together for millions of years can lead to living organisms. No, it can't. And I don't have time to go into all this stuff, but I brought, there's a 1-minute videos. You'll see them on your thing. It's Creation Ministries International, the shorts. It's 1-minute videos. And the guys, and this PhD chemist explains how life cannot begin in water, because water breaks apart the molecules faster than they get put together. So water cannot begin or life cannot begin in water. And I asked the school board, hey, what's your curriculum degree? The curriculum director, what's her degree? What's the chemistry's or the science teacher? What are their degrees? Do they understand what this PhD is saying? And so who knows if they ever got found out about that. And then they also say, scientists haven't been able to come up with a working hypothesis as to why our retinas are set up backwards, which is false. You go into the Smithsonian or PubMed and you realize there's cells in front act like fiber optics. And it's very good at optimizing the lights, so this is false. And I couldn't believe this one. These are Haeckel's drawings. And they're real similar to what Haeckel drew, right? And he drew them in the 1870s, trying to get some evidence for evolution. Nobody had a microscope. See, it doesn't matter if you're on the right side, you're a bird, a bunny, or a person. The embryos on the left are all the same. And that was a lie, or that was false. That's what they actually look like in the middle there. They don't look anything like that, what he drew. They don't look anything like each other. And yet those are still in our textbooks today. And I had this at the fair, and somebody said, well, they should update their textbooks. It's like, they're this brand new textbooks. They're still there. And this is The New Scientist, how fudged embryo illustrations led to drawn out lies. It's embarrassing but true. Yeah, I think it sure is embarrassing to have something that's false for 100 years still in there. Some of the most influential drawings in the history of biology are wrong. Exaggerated to fit theories, just like they manipulate the data to get 1%. Embryonic fraud lives on. This is 1997, and it's still in the textbooks. And it still appear in reference books almost 30 years ago, and in textbooks today. And although Haeckel confessed of drawing from memory and was convicted of fraud at the University of Vienna, the drawings persist. That's the real mystery, absolutely. Why are they still in there? So we can't trust the textbooks. Hey, can we trust the museums? Who can trust the museum? Who would doubt the museums? A couple of weeks ago, we went down to the Living Water Bible Camp Creation Conference. And I brought a college kid down there, and we stopped at this National Eagle Center. And I said to him, how many times do you think we're going to see millions of years in here? And so we go through, and we didn't see it at all, but we did see this tongue child skull. And I happened to have this book by Dr. Carl Werner in my car, so I went and I brought, and this is what it says. The tongue child skull is an example of an ancestor to humanity. Okay, so it's an ape-like ancestor, but in the book, it shows the tongue child skull on the left, or on the top, and compare it to a juvenile chimpanzee on the right. They're as identical. They're pretty identical to me, and so that tongue child, supposed tongue child, is actually a chimpanzee. And I pointed it out to somebody at the museum. I got some questions on this tongue child. Are you aware of this? And she said, well, you should, she was really interested, really extremely interested. And she said, man, you just can't trust anyone. And, she always wondered, what does that skull have to do with eagles? And they say, oh, it's got scratch marks. I don't see the scratch marks, And then in that book on the next page, it had, talking about his contemporaries, they rebuked him for calling it a human ancestor when it was a chimpanzee. And they knew they thought it was a chimpanzee for 20 years. And so that person in the museum said, you should talk to somebody over there. And so I went over there, and she had me call somebody, and then she took pictures of those pinks I just showed you. And then I called him, and he finally got back to me yesterday, and we had a conversation, and he said, yeah, we'll look into it, and we'll have a committee meeting to see if it should stay or not. And I asked him, well, would you let me know what your decision is? And he goes, well, I can't promise you that. We're too busy. And so I emailed him, and but he emailed me back today, and he said that he would let me know what they decide. So thank you. So at this point, and I think we need to start asking questions all the time when we see millions or billions of years. And so we can't really trust the museums or the textbooks. How about AI? Can we trust AI? This is Fred Williams. He did a talk at the Hydroplate conference in 2023, and this is one of his slides. He asks ChatGPT, is the East Pacific Ridge the only divergent zone in the Pacific? And it says no. You don't have to know what these are. It just says no, it's not. And so, and he goes on to describe the Mid-Pacific Ridge. And Fred couldn't find anything on the mid, he Googled around, he couldn't find anything. So he asked, now keep in mind, AI says that it exists. And so then Fred asks him, does the Mid-Pacific Ridge really exist? He goes, oh, I apologize. There is no widely recognized geological feature known as the Mid-Pacific Ridge. And they had just told them that there was the time before. So you cannot just trust ChatGPT or AI, and there's biases built in. And Mark Dice, I don't know if you've ever seen him on YouTube, but he's pretty good at exposing them. This was a year ago. This probably got fixed. But he asked this image. This is Gemini's image maker. He says, could you make a happy white couple? And it said, I'm not able to fulfill your request. And so he said, could you make a happy black couple? He said, sure, here it is. And then he did, could you make a successful white person? And I'm able to fulfill your request. Could you make a successful black person? Here you go. And he went over and over and over like that. And I think it was Gab's AI thing. They said, hey, thank you, Gemini, for sending us 40,000 people overnight, because there's a bias out there. And then, oh yeah. And did you guys know that the Satanists had a display in the Capitol for Easter in April? Yeah, Liz Collins posted this, and there was a little plaque that said, the Democrat Coalition of Satan Worshippers thank Governor Tim Walz for not standing in the way of spreading Satanism in the state capitol. Satan has a special place for you. Yeah. And then over Christmas, they had a bigger display there. And it had the rising phoenix. It had the upside-down pentagram. And they said, well, you just have to go fill out this form. And I don't know if that upsets you or not, but it kind of upsets me. And it's like, okay, if that's the way you want to play, I want 25 churches with their displays the rest of the year. And so if that's a church, and if you're watching online, I ask that your pastor would consider this so that we can drown out their message. Okay, and that's the Department of Administration Facilities Management. If they can do it, we can do it. If that's how they want to play, let's play that way. I think our ideas, let's have a battle of ideas. Let's do that. And let's not censor any ideas. And then I had this idea too. Could you imagine seeing this at the 4th of July? Some people carrying this banner. May God bless America as America honors God. And then have this freedom song like Jesus is the way or whatever. And then you hand out these freedom tracts. And it's like, because the problem we have is a lot of people don't know what their freedoms are. And I do this, and I'll try it here. Does anybody know what's in the First Amendment? There's only been a handful of people at all the places that I speak. We don't know what our freedoms are. So we don't know when they're being violated. And I ask Marines and Army guys and sheriffs and deputies and even elected officials, hey, what's in the First Amendment? I have yet to find anybody who's taken a vow to defend the Constitution who can tell me what's in the First Amendment. It's like, well, if you can't define it, how do you defend it? And so we need to get that. So you just imagine this going through a 4th of July parade, this music's thing, and then people are on the side handing out these tracts. And you open it up and it says, hey, what freedoms are in the First Amendment? And it gives them 5 things, and it has fill in the blank. You know, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of, and it goes through, and then in the middle it says, why did pilgrims come to America? Yeah, and then did people evolve or were we created? In the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are, they have to write in, created, and they were endowed by their creator, so they have to write those things in. And so it'd be a good way for people to learn. And then on the right, it has the answers. These are the freedoms that we have. It's religion, speech, press, peaceably assemble, and petition the government. And I only know that because I was at St. Cloud State and somebody called security saying I was saying stuff that they didn't like. And so the next day my sign was, well, what's in the First Amendment? There's only 2 students that could do it. And I didn't even know what was in it, so I had to find out. So it's important for us to know, and then the Declaration, and then as far as the Mayflower Compact, by the grace of God, for the glory of God, and the advancement of the Christian faith, these are foundational documents for our country, and we don't know them. And I think there's a reason we don't know them. You know, a government that can get rid of God in the science class, now government's in charge. And a government that doesn't tell you what your freedoms are can take away your freedoms. And so I think we need to be aware of that. And then on the back side, it says, are you free from the bondage of sin? And I got some verses there. And then I've got, if you died today, where would you go? There's salvation verses there. And I did one, our church doesn't want to do it, so I'm working with a business. You know, would you want to have a business do this? Have some goodwill in the community. You know, build up your reputation. And that's the thing, if you have somebody in your church who wants to do something, use their God-given gifts, let them run with it. Because they're going to use their God-given gifts one way or another. It's either going to be for the church or for someone else. You know? And so let's move on. All creationists on deck. Okay, let's wind this down a little bit. We got more information against the Big Bang and evolution than ever before. More easy access to this information than ever before. We got a theory that's making accurate predictions. We've even got a PhD at the university, at the U.S. Air Force Academy, who's publicly speaking on this topic. And you can see him talk at the hydroplate.org. That's our first conference. So I'm here to call you to action. You know, someone can't do everything, but everyone can do something. If we all did a little bit. You know, those big floods in the spring, they all started with raindrops or snowflakes. You get enough of them together, or even those big branches, they snap because there's so many little things on them. So we got to get the little things to start getting a little more unified, a little more organized, and a little more informed, and that's why the cheat sheets are here. You're going to find out what points to 6,000 years. You're going to see the accurate predictions. You're going to see where the weaknesses are in the blind chance perspective. You know, you're going to see the errors in the textbooks, and you're going to see which websites you can go to debunk those errors. And I'd encourage you to check out your textbooks. You're paying for them. You might as well see what's in them, and then start holding their feet to the fire if it's false information, or at least have them lay their hands down, lay their cards down. Because when I went to the St. Cloud School District, I figured we all wanted accurate textbooks. And I walk away realizing they did nothing to get accurate textbooks. And so they laid their cards down. So if somebody wants their spot, they can point that out. And I think that we could do this all around the state, all around the country. And then you also know about the rescuing devices. Those are all the things they have to imagine to be true to prop up that theory. And then you have the wrong predictions, and then the frauds. And then these websites, man, there's so many good websites right now. And just minute videos, animated videos, you get up to speed. And then also, what we can do is we can vote with our money. Can you imagine if Christians only supported Christian organizations? Starbucks, they support abortion. I'm against abortion. I'm not going to give them a dime. You know, I don't know if Target, when they started letting men in the women's bathroom, I oppose that. I haven't been to Target Well, there was one time I was on the road. I had to get a flash drive for my camera. I got it, and I felt so bad. I went and I took it back. It's like, I'm not giving you a dime. My brother was here from Virginia, or my son was here from Virginia, and he forgot his underwear, you know, and so we went to Runnings, and it's like, well, that's $20 or whatever. And he said, let's go over to Target. They might have them cheaper. And I said, here's $20. We're not going in there. So I think if we just funded Christian things, and as far as gifts, down at the bottom, you know, you can sign up for Acts and Facts. That's free. And also magazines. The Creation magazine is really neat. And kids would love it. Nephews, nieces, easy to understand, a creation message. And then also gifts. Our kids are getting bombarded with a false ideology. And they tend to, now, Ken Ham wrote a book, Already Gone, where he said that statistically, 2/3 of our kids stop going to church when they leave home, from Christian, conservative churches. And he thought, surveyed them, why is that? The main reason was basically they doubted the Bible was true. So they asked, well, when did you start to doubt? And it was junior high and high school mainly. And that's when they're getting the Big Bang and evolution taught as dogma. And I was at a community college one time, and a woman came up and she said that her niece or her daughter, one of the two, were going through confirmation. And she asked the priest about dinosaurs. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. What did he say? And she said, I don't know, but it didn't make her happy. It was pretty much just believe it because I said so. And so we'll just call it her daughter concluded that either Adam and Eve are false or dinosaurs are false. And how can dinosaurs be false when you find them all over the, fossils everywhere? And so I looked at her and I said, your daughter's real close to kicking the Bible out of her life for the rest of her life. I said, dinosaurs are true and Adam and Eve are true. The thing that's false is millions of years. Get rid of that imagination, and then it'll fit. I'm going to be asking this at the homeschool convention. We set up tomorrow. We got Friday and Saturday. Day one is, when did dinosaurs live? Because I did that at a Christian event in St. Cloud, and it was millions of years, 80 to 50. And then the next day is going to be, how old is the earth? Millions or thousands. And so we're going to talk about those things and why we believe those things. And as far as dinosaurs, Ken Ham talks about, well, how do you fit dinosaurs into the Bible? And Ken says, you don't. You use the Bible to explain dinosaurs. They were made on day 6 with the other land animals. 2 of every kind got on the ark. They were young, so they could still get in. And then the flood came and turned killed all the other ones outside the ark, and a lot of them turned into fossils. And then the dinosaurs got off the ark. People called them dragons and killed them and carved them in castles and caves and temples. Anatomically correct dinosaurs. And it bothered Carl Sagan so much. How can these people in different parts of the world, separated by time and distance, carve the same animal? And he wrote a book called Dragons of Eden. You can still get it on Amazon. And he proposed that our memories are passed on in our DNA. And that's been debunked. So there's a lot of evidence that man walked with dinosaurs. I even interviewed Dr. Carl Baugh on my podcast playlist. He found a human footprint 19 inches away from a dinosaur footprint. And he was an old earther. He couldn't sleep for 4 nights. And so I interviewed him. How rare is that? And he's got a museum down there at Glen Rose, Texas called Creation Evidence Museum. And that's really how I started. I came out of there and I thought, man, why do I got to go to Texas to learn this? Why isn't this common knowledge? Why doesn't somebody do something? And apparently there were a lot of people doing something. I just hadn't heard of them. And I thought, well, perhaps I'll prepare and my chance will come. And God keeps opening doors for me. So this is the call for action. Get informed and inform others. And here's some ideas. I'm not learning this stuff from a textbook. I'm not saying this is what those people do. And I'm not even saying necessarily that you need to do what I'm doing. But these ideas. But however God's wired you. What are you passionate about? Use that passion to glorify Him. And for me, I look at the world, there's a battle between God's truth and Satan's lies. That's why we're in this mess. And I think ground zero is creation versus evolution. And the battlefield is the classroom. And so we need to get people all the information so they can make informed decisions. And I had a booth at the fair. This is the second favorite thing I do all year. I have a booth at the fair, and this, you notice there the question is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? You know, we just get on that. I want to know, what do you believe, blind chance or creator? And so then we started a local creation club. And right now we're meeting at the public library once a month, and you get to see some of these talks on my Creation Science 101 playlist. And so we did that. And then, this is today, took this picture, coming through Banning State Park. You know, and I asked my wife, we're going to these placards, I asked my wife, you know, how many times do you think we're going to see, millions or billions of years? And here it was. You know, it formed over 2 million years ago. And so I went back to the park place, and I had gone in there first, you know, hey, any kayakers here, and had a good conversation with her. And then I went back in and I asked, how do you know that was 2 million years? How do you know what happened 2 million years ago? How do you know that rock's 2 million years old? And they all kind of point to their boss. And she says, well, that's what the smart people tell us. And I said, well, they're teaching it's based on a blind chance perspective. That's the Big Bang and evolution. And I said, it's like this building. Do you think that got put together by blind chance? You know, and how much more absurd to think our bodies got put together by chance. And as I'm saying that, the coworker in the background's nodding her head. And I said, well, could you reconsider that? If you're going to have one belief system of the past, have another one. Or just tell us what we have. We got rocks and trees and water. Don't give us your interpretation. And I left him a couple of my cards, and then somebody had come in, and I thought they had to work with him, and it was just a delivery person. So I went back and I told them about the eagle at the Eagle Center, you know. And so we need to start asking questions. And then this is at the, where was this? The Thompson Hill Travel Information Center. Anybody ever stop there up on the hill and look over there? Well, this is at the Lookout. You got 1.1 billion years. You got 20 million years. And they're not open. You know, they're only open Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday now. But they have a suggestion box, and so I wrote it out. How do you know what happened 20 million years ago? And so I wrote it out. I've got it in my email. And so, yeah, so that's what we can do. We can just start asking questions. How do you know that? And when I talk to the kids tomorrow, and if you want, I'm speaking at Lakeview Christian School tomorrow at 8:15 and 9:15. And I've got the 4th to 8th graders. I'm going to teach them how to be God's detectives. You know, where did that come from? And they can find out who's on God's team and who's not. Hey, where did people come from? If they point you to Adam and Eve, they believe what God said. And if they don't believe what God said. And ask questions. And how do you know that? And then after that, I'll be talking to the 9th through 12th graders. And I'll show them some errors in the textbooks and the Hydroplate. And so I go to St. Cloud State. We have free speech zones, and I use them. I wish there was an indoor one, but that's what I do. And I ask them, where's your faith? A, nothing exploded, or B, God created. You know, that's what it is. Where's your faith? And then I started that Creation Science Club, and what's this question? Should false information be taught from textbooks? See what they said. And then at Northwestern, we had a club going down there. Emily did great. She handed it off to the next president, and then COVID hit, so we're starting all over again. Okay, and I go to school board meetings. Oh, and you can see these comments on my YouTube channel. See how they respond. And I even wished them a Merry Christmas, you know? And I even and Jesus also said, if you cause one of these little ones to stumble, it'd be better if your millstone were hung around your neck and you'd be cast into the depths of the sea. And so hopefully people think about that, because I care about them. You know, I was at St. Cloud State, and a psych major came up, and he said, what are you doing here? I get that occasionally. And I said, sometimes they'll say, I just want to give you the opportunity to think. You're not getting that opportunity in class. You're only getting one perspective. But for the psych major, I said, if you saw a blind person walking towards a cliff, would you warn them? And he said, yeah, absolutely. And I said, well, that's what I see. I see people who are blinded, and they're going towards a cliff, and if they go off without Jesus, they're going to spend an eternity in hell. And God doesn't want that, and I don't want that. But they can choose to do that. But they have to consciously walk by me. They have to consciously reject Jesus. That's why I'm here. You know, and he didn't believe in Jesus, but that's why. And so that's what I see. And this is that Christian event that I talked to you about. When did dinosaurs live? 81 to 51. So our churches are not doing a very good job of explaining dinosaurs with the Bible. They're using man's word to interpret the Bible instead of God's word to interpret the world. And this is me at the University of Penn State in Altoona doing the same thing. How did we get here? Creation in 6 days, evolution in millions of years, intelligent design. And so I just like, it opens up some really neat conversations. And basically, they need to think about these things. And sometimes they'll say, well, I just believe in, what do they say? I believe in science, not God, or not the Bible. And I'll ask, well, what do you mean by science? Let's define the terms. And basically, the scientific method is what we usually get down to. It's observable, testable, repeatable, and falsifiable. And it's observation and testing. Well, the Big Bang and evolution is none of that. And they go, sure it is. And I say, no, show me an experiment. And they can't. So they have just as much faith. I would argue they have more faith than I do. What they believe, nothing exploding, turning into everything, hydrogen and helium turning into people, that takes a lot of imagination and faith. And you can see some of these talks. Since we have a creation organization, a club recognized on campus, we can use their facilities. And we do. This is one of the talks. Oh yeah, there's a whole, I encourage you to watch this on the college playlist. This is the Hydroplate Theory I did it on. And they were stealing our posters, and they did it on camera, and they know who did it, but they won't tell us if it was a student, faculty, or staff, and they won't make them pay for it. So it's very interesting, and so they thought, well, if you're going to steal it, we're going to do it again at our local club. And they were ripping up our posters. And it's like, oh. And then I got 50 of these posters. Our church, thank God, they printed 50 of these, plastered them all over campus during homecoming week, and they were ripping them down. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, we'll do it right here on campus then. And so we went right into St. Cloud State, and we showed them how the biblical perspective, the Hydroplate Theory, answers all these mysteries. Scientists can't answer, the origin of Grand Canyon, nerves in dinosaur bones, fusing past iron, cubonite and comets, all these things that they're mystified by. But the Hydroplate Theory will explain it. So I encourage you to bring your friends on Sunday, because I'm going to go through a theory that you're really going to enjoy. And somebody, I don't have it here, but somebody commented underneath it, and he says, this is the most excited I've got in a long time. And so it's fun. Oh, and this is my favorite thing to do in December, is go to St. Cloud State and wish people Merry Christmas. And I got the Bluetooth speaker, and I'll play them Christmas carols all day. I just love doing it. Hey, celebrating a national holiday. And that's a lot of fun. We did a creation tour at the zoo. That was a lot of fun. You guys have a zoo up here, right? Yeah, you can give a creation tour there. And a sign there, it says TCCSA, but on the back it said blind chance or creator. And get people to think. This is our library. They got the neatest facilities. A few years ago, I asked if I could have a Creation Club meeting there, and the clerk said no. And then later on, I was just looking for spaces, and it's like, the Baha'i Faith gets a room? Well, then I better get a room. So I didn't even ask. I just plugged it in, and they gave it to me. So we've been meeting once a month for about a year and a half, and those talks are on YouTube. You could just plug and play if you want. Have a club and just play them. The third, I think, the Age of the Earth one, I talk about Bible versions, so you might want to watch that one first. Anyhow, and I get invited to barbecues. I just go wherever God opens the doors. I've done VBSs, which is a lot of fun. I'm going to do, this is God's Detectives. We'll be doing that a little bit tomorrow. And somebody had commented to the pastor, it's like, man, that was the best VBS we've had. So we try and get them equipped. And mainly we get to this question, hey, where will you be in 100 years? And they'll say, I'll be in the grave. And I said, what about your spirit? Where's that going to be? Heaven or hell? What have you done with Jesus? And so we start talking about that. And then Jesus died for you, so it's a lot of... I just want people to think about Jesus. That's what I want. I want to proclaim him loudly, boldly, and I think that that message needs to be proclaimed. And I think we can win this thing. We really can. We got all the information we need. We got more access to this information than ever before. We got more evidence against evolution and the Big Bang than ever before. But there's a lot of false information out there. So we have to give people all the information so they can think. And I think when we get people thinking, they're going to think a creation had a creator. And then the governor, and then the blind chancellors will lose their power. It's like the emperor has no clothes. You know, you guys know that story, right? You know, they were pretending the clothes were beautiful. Nobody wanted to, because they didn't want to be thought of as ignorant. Then finally a boy says the emperor has no clothes, and they all realize they've been deceived. So we need more people just doing whatever we can. You know, whatever God leads you to do. But if you don't do something this month if there's no change this month, then last month nothing's going to change. So I encourage you to just make a little change this month, and get more informed and try and inform others. All right, that's going to wind it up. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Do we have some time for some questions and answers?
Yes, we got questions. Yes. So it's just me. I go wherever God opens the doors. And as long as He keeps providing, I'll keep going. And I tell you, it is the funnest ministry. It really is. The campus ministry, I have conversations with people that I'd never have conversations with anywhere else. And that's such a pivotal point in life. It depends on where their friends are. They're going to be just like their friends in 5 years, so they have to pick their friends wisely. And that's what we try to do. Get them into church, and it's been fun. And it's a lot easier to keep them on the road than to pull them out of the ditch. And so we try to have a blast on the road. And it's a lot of fun, you know, and it's really fun asking questions that they can't answer, you know, the professors and stuff. And yes?
Are you familiar with a band named Kent Hovind?
Kent Hovind, yes, I am. That's actually how I got my start. My cousin Carol and her husband, they sent me a copy of Kent Hovind's The Age of the Earth 21 years ago. And we got it in the mail, and it's the VHS things. We plugged it in. And first time in my life I ever heard that fossils are sign of the flood. Layers of sedimentary rock, that's sign of a flood. You know, and evidence is based on lies, and he showed us what the lies were. And he had a 17-hour seminar that we ordered. Yeah, it's 7 DVDs, and we watched it, and we just plug it in and eat popcorn with our kids. They're in grade school or so, and I looked at my wife, and it's like, well, I didn't learn that in school. And she goes, neither did I. And I said, I wonder what else they didn't teach me in school. And so Kent Hovind, he equipped us to look, you know, I think then wherever I go, people ask me about Kent Hovind. And I think, you know, he had a small army of people that were informed. And I think that saved us during COVID. I think there was people that weren't trusting, and they started asking questions, and they resisted. So I don't know, you know, in some respect, I think that we have our freedoms. But I would just prayerfully consider starting a creation club. Open it up to and I've got a movie somewhere here for you, Pastor, and it would be a good one. And he's also got one that's Mike Snavely, Mission Imperative, The Horrors of the Flood. I like to think of it more as the evidence of the flood. He's got some amazing footage of bent rock layers going up and then straight down. Just phenomenal. And then he's also got one, Puzzle on the Plateau, where not only does he explain Grand Canyon, but he explains the Great Grand Circle, Zion and Bryce and Monument Valley and the Painted Forest. It all has to do with the same event. And once we understand that, it'll color in all the details for us, and we'll have a lot more solid worldview. So Kent Hovind connected the dots for me. I knew that the government was lying to me. But what colored in the details is when I listened to Walt Brown Week on Real Science Radio. He's the guy who developed the Hydroplate Theory. And then everything just fit into place, fell into place. And it's very exciting, because I'll talk to college students about it a lot, and they find it fascinating. Because I could have I almost wasn't here. I almost went to St. Louis, where all the scientists were going to be at their creation conference, to see if I could get a table and try and convince them. And I think it was Fred who emailed me and said, don't waste your time, their mind's made up, go to the homeschoolers. Let's not care about what people think. Let's not care about, you know, anything. Let's just proclaim Jesus loudly and proudly. And because there's lives in the battle and lives in the balance. And our young generation, they're getting lied to like crazy. Some of them don't even know if they're human or not. They think they're cats, you know? Yeah, and that's not just in California. That was I spoke in Hastings, Nebraska, they had one, and Holdingford, Minnesota has one. And I wish the superintendent would say, okay, you're a cat, get out. We don't teach cats. You go catch a mouse. You want to play this game? We'll play it. But that, just notice, just keep in mind, somebody sent me a video and look what's happened. What if somebody, you guys sent somebody a video and see what would happen? I shudder to think where I'd be, where my kids would be. And so just something little. They had no idea. They thought maybe he's going to get mad, but I was just so thankful, and I keep thanking him. Thank you for sending that to me. And that's maybe something that we can do, just to get this truth into somebody else's idea, mind. And now you don't even have to send it. You can just send them a link. Hey, what do you think of this video? And who knows what God will do with it. If you have ever seen that St. John in Exile, Dean Jones, he does a one-man play. You can see it on YouTube, a one-man play. It's just phenomenal. But as he's acting out John recollecting his experience with Jesus, and he acts out different characters, and his portrayal of the crucifixion and the resurrection is just stunning. But there's somewhere in there where they talked about, the feeding of the 5,000, and he goes, he realized that little is much in the hands of Jesus. So let's just give him the little we have and see what he does with it.